4, 3, 2, 1. Coming to you live is Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, good to hear from you once again. We're going to spend, I think, a little more time today on questions because, we never can answer all of your questions. As hard as I try to be succinct and brief, there were just too many questions, so we'll leave a little more time.
That was a goofy smile. I was laughing because you had a goofy smile in the beginning, which I liked.
You like Goofy.
Yeah. I'm also interested why you started the podcast. Nice to hear from you. Have you heard from anybody today?
Uh, Good point. You think I'm obsolete, huh?
Right. Maybe when you start the podcast, you'll be like, "Great to be here," or something like that.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of
You don't like
bland.
that?
That's all right.
But
I'll
like,
figure out something.
but nice to hear from you. I mean,
How about nice to be with you? Does that work?
didn't I just say that? Or nice to be here, nice to be
No.
with you. Okay, that works. All right.
All
So,
right. No matter
what's
what, we love our folks.
no
I
matter
can
what?
say that.
Yes. Strange weekend, Dad. A second assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. Really weird, don't you think? I mean, not weird, just like it's just a weird point in American history. It's almost like now assassination attempts are just like happening every other month to Donald Trump. It's just strange.
It's a horrible thing if, violence gets normalized. It's the last thing we want in America, no matter who it's directed against. Violence is reprehensible and unacceptable
Yeah.
and not strictly preventable. There's no way you can secure a golf course. And Trump was warned that he would be vulnerable, on the golf course. It's huge. It's open. It would take at least 1,000 Secret Service to secure every point on the golf course. It just can't happen. And, I've said many times, if you are willing to risk your own life, then you might have a shot at a presidential candidate or even a president. But remember, as Sam says, this is kind of new. When was the last time we had an attempt at a president
Before
or
these
a
double
major party candidate? What?
before these double Trump ones, you're saying?
Yeah,
Um, Reagan?
Ronald Reagan.
You got to give me a second, dude.
Oh, Froggy twanged you. I'm
Oh
sorry.
God, not Froggy again. You haven't said Froggy in a long time. I don't know if there's any viewers left from those days when you always said Froggy.
Oh, our viewers are very loyal. I'm sure we have viewers who are on the very
Yeah,
first.
maybe.
So it's been a long time. It's been 40 years plus since there's been an assassination attempt. And, more broadly, violence has become normalized. After every one of these attempts or after every one of the mass killings, everyone's saying, oh, what's the motive? Can we figure out the motive? Can we figure out the motive, Sam?
I haven't really been following this one. I thought I saw a little bit that he was like, super pro Ukraine or something, but I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so hard to know.
yeah. It
The truth is,
seems like most of these are motivated by
who knows what?
violence. That's about
Violent
it.
impulses.
Yeah.
The only really crystal clear motive would be John Wilkes Booth shooting and killing Abraham Lincoln to try to preserve the Confederacy. Other than that, all these presidential, including the Hinckley shooting Reagan, Sirhan shooting RFK, uh, supposedly, I guess, I don't want to get into that, Lee Harvey Oswald shooting JFK, and you can go on, and we don't know what the motive is. And
Right.
sadly, this does seem to be more frequent. Uh, and it's pretty unique to our democracy as opposed to our peer nations. And there's one common denominator to all this violence, and that's guns, whether it's attempted assassinations against presidential candidates or mass shootings that occur about once every day in America and that occur almost once a week for school. We live in supposedly the greatest, most advanced democracy in the world, and yet our kids are afraid. to go to school, and for good reason. It's just horrific. And there's one common denominator in all of this, Sam. What is that?
Guns.
Guns. Everything else washes out. It's guns. We have more mass shootings than all of our allies in North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa combined. Combined, we have about one every single day. And I and saying, well, it's just a fact of life. That's nonsense. It's only a fact of life here. It's not a fact of life anywhere else in any other peer democracy. And mass shootings are the tip of the iceberg. There are some 15,000 gun murders a year. It's just astounding. Dozens of gun murders a day in America. An American is 20 times more likely to be murdered by a gun than residents of our closest peer nations. And they also have mental health issues. They have gangs, they have drugs. All of that washes out. The only difference is how we deal with guns. Now, in terms of this incident at Trump Golf Course, my first thought is I'm so glad no one was hurt, including the former president. I'm so glad no one was killed. Shots were fired, but not at Trump. Shots were fired at the would-be gunman, and who apparently was unhurt and later apprehended by law enforcement. So the good news is, unlike the horrific incident at the Trump rally where someone was killed and others were hurt, no one was hurt at all. Everyone escaped unscathed, and I'm so glad for that. The downside, of course, is what you expect. Trump has tried to exploit this politically. Absolutely shameful. Claiming it's the result of rhetoric by Harris and the Democrats, without a shred of proof that anything Harris or a Democrat or Republican or anyone said had any influence on this supposed would-be assassin. It's even more shameful since who is the source of the most violent rhetoric in America, Sam?
Trump.
Trump talks about his opponents being vermin. When he thought Hillary Clinton would win and appoint judges, he said there's a Second Amendment solution to that. At his rallies, he talked about people knocking the hell out of them. He has called for long-term prison sentences for basically any political opponent, anyone who he disagrees with, demonizing them as targets, in effect, as reprehensible, loathsome criminals. Of course, he never details a single criminal act anyone has done to them, but he hasn't done this once. He has done this over and over and over again. But I have to say the worst to come out of this was not from Trump. The worst came from someone else. You know who that was, Sam?
No.
Leon. You know who Leon is?
Leon?
That's what Donald Trump called Elon Musk.
Oh, what did Elon do?
Leon, his biggest supporter. Elon Musk posted something that I thought was not only utterly reprehensible and dangerous, but I thought it was criminal. He posted, I guess on his site or somewhere, a statement saying, why hasn't Kamala Harris been the target of an assassination attempt? Essentially saying, hey, let's even this up. Let's have some assassination attempts on Harris. Well, the backlash, as you could imagine, was so powerful that it really, even Musk had to withdraw this post. But can you imagine saying something like that? Very overtly applying, hey, even it up, let's have some assassination attempts against Vice President Harris. I didn't think anyone could top Trump when it came to the incitement of violence, but somehow in the aftermath of this very sad incident, Elon Musk has managed to do it.
I'm so sick of this.
All right, I think this is our shortest commentary ever.
I'm so sick of Elon Musk, man. I'm so sick of that guy. He
Yeah,
sucks.
but when you got hundreds of billions of dollars, you're not going to make him go away, are you?
No, of course not. But yeah, it doesn't
Are,
mean I'm,
are
doesn't.
you as rich as him?
Let me see if I
Think
can.
about it.
No.
No.
Um,
Do you make as much money in your lifetime as he probably makes in a day?
no, I don't think
Not even
so.
close.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad that, you should be able to criticize Trump on the actions that he's taken, which are threats to democracy. You should be able to criticize him politically without people being like, "You're the reason that people hate him and people are trying to shoot him." You know what I mean? It's just
Absolutely. Look, none of the Democrats' rhetoric has been violent.
right.
Trump's rhetoric repeatedly has been grossly violent. And let's not forget, he incited the mob to storm the Capitol. We know he wanted them to do this because he sat for 3 hours while this mob wreaked mayhem, injuring, this guy supposedly all for the police, injuring 140 plus police officers, resulting in direct and indirect deaths. He sat there for 3 hours watching it on television. His son, his supporters on Fox, members of Republican congressional and Senate delegations called him and pleaded with him to do something. Sat for 3 hours. It was Mike Pence, the vice president, not the president, who tried calling law enforcement.
All right, let's get to some questions so we can have a bunch of time for those.
We got a lot of time.
We just want to reiterate we are glad that Trump is the place to beat Trump is at the ballot box. That's it.
Absolutely.
Or maybe
That's
in
the
court
first thing
too.
I
But
said. I am so glad no
yeah,
one was hurt.
yeah,
There is
me
no
too.
place for violence in American politics or anywhere in American life, and sadly, there's much too much of it.
Yeah. Vincent Escalano says if we lose the Senate and Harris can't secure the major policy key, I see her in a strong position to focus on foreign policy and lock down the two related keys, which would count for more come 2028.
Very smart commentary. I think all the time presidents should concentrate, at least in significant part, on securing the foreign policy keys because that's good for the country and good for the world. And you correctly indicate a president doesn't have entirely a free hand in foreign policy, but much more latitude to put her stamp on foreign policy than is true of domestic policy when you're dealing with divided government. And particularly, Republicans have made it clear. I'm not making this up. I'm not doing this to cast aspersions on anyone, but they've made it clear that they intend to block any initiative coming out of Harris.
Dudley Murdoch says it is unlikely that the economic misery index will rise and go up in October. That's the Mr. Beat. That's his way of predicting elections is the misery index, right?
It's a combination of unemployment and inflation.
Right, right,
And it's reasonably low right now. It's nowhere near where it was when Reagan made it up when it was over 20 points. Now it's something like 6 or 7.
right. Well, shout out to Mr. Beat. And if you watched the episode, I called him Mr. Beast like 2 times.
I know, that
And
was terrible.
that was honest to God a mistake. I don't know why it just slipped out 2 times. That was honest to God a mistake. Mr. Beat, I apologize. I sent him an email. He said it was totally cool, but just for the public's knowledge, I was not trolling him. I was not making fun of him. It was
You like him.
I like him. It was an honest mistake. But yeah, it's unlikely the misery index will go up before the election. You answered this, right? Or do you want to? You talked about
Yeah,
that, right? Okay.
if it moves at all, it'll be very marginal. We're only going to get one more report for the election anyway, which is
Right.
not going to move it substantially. But that's not how I calculate the short-term economic key. I calculate the short-term economic key in terms of whether there's a recession or not, and there's not going to be a recession in the next 50 or so days. And Mr. Beat, as you say, has his own method, and I encourage that. I don't discourage others to develop alternative methods. I encourage it. Do it, but don't impose your ideas on my keys. You want to use my keys, you got to stick to how they're defined and applied since 1860.
Member Jeremy Homan says, Hey, Sam and Dr. Lichtman, the 13 Keys model focuses on structural factors to predict presidential elections, minimizing the impact of campaign dynamics and voter persuasion efforts. In light of this, do you believe the model suggests that U.S. elections ultimately function as reflections of national conditions rather than expressions of voter who will or deliberate democratic choice?
Hey, by the way, see what I'm
Oh,
drinking?
LaCroix.
Listening to our folks.
Nice. Um,
I'm not sure I understand the question at all, but I'll try to grapple with it. The keys do deal with simple integral parameters about the electorate as a whole. They don't try to examine the motivations, the determination of individual voters like the polls try to do. And you're right. In that way, they reflect national conditions that explain the outcome of elections and not the ephemeral events of the campaign. That's why I very deliberately issued my prediction before the debate that all the conventional wisdom crowd was saying, this is make or break, it's going to determine the election. And I said, no, uh, I'm making my prediction without consideration of the debate at all or anything that is going to happen in the last 2 months of this campaign.
member Mashik Kahan or Ma Mahesh K Hana 2385. Sometimes,
That's
man,
quite a,
sometimes
quite a moniker.
sometimes these names are hard to read. I gotta be honest with you guys. They
You
say,
can't blame you. You're doing your best you can.
yeah, they say if campaigns are not a significant factor in changing the outcome of an election, then why should parties spend so much time and money in campaigning?
Great question. First of all, they're locked into what I call the political industrial complex. It's the counterpart to the military industrial complex. And the military industrial complex has its grip on the country because of an iron triangle. The political industrial complex has its own iron triangle, which explains what you're talking about. At one point are the admin, the handlers, the consultants, the pollsters who make huge money from this horse race theory that elections are horse races based upon the day-to-day events of the campaign with candidates sprinting ahead or falling behind and pollsters keeping score. Another point on the triangle is the media, which has to cover the campaign every single day. So they've got to follow what the pollsters and the pundits are doing. And the third point on the triangle is the candidates, the politicians who are afraid to go up against the media, the pundits, and the pollsters.
Member Megan Frankie says, could Donald Trump foment social unrest with all the inflammatory things he's saying about immigrants, particularly in respect to the bomb threats in Springfield, Ohio?
I think he's been absolutely trying to foment social unrest. I think number one, he's well aware of the keys. Remember, I got a congratulatory letter from him after I predicted his win in 2016, which had put to the rest any idea that I wasn't predicting an actual win for Donald Trump. What arrant nonsense. Uh, and he thrives in chaos. That's what he loves. He believes the more chaotic the country, the better off he is. So, yes, I do think he is trying to foment social unrest, but it hasn't worked.
Jacobs Travail says, is there any logic to more true keys for the incumbent, the broader the victory?
I think I've talked about this before. There is a rough correlation between the number of true keys and the magnitude of the victory. So, big victorious candidates like Ronald Reagan or Franklin Roosevelt lost very few keys for their reelection. I think something like three or two. Uh, and very close elections have lost more keys, or one fewer keys. So yes, there is a rough correlation, although the system is binary. It's not explicitly designed to measure margins, but it's really interesting. I didn't do this, but in 2000, the journal Political Science produced a lot of articles on election forecasting by political scientists. And they looked at like 10 models, which models most closely predicted the popular vote margins, and the keys came in first. Even though they're not designed for that, you can use them for that.
Kenyatta Gain says, what do you think of Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and can it be used to rein in the radical Supreme Court? Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and can it be used to rein in the radical Supreme Court? They asked the same question twice.
Yeah, well, I need to know exactly what it says. I don't have it right in my head.
Let me see. Article 3, Section 2. Let me see. You're getting live research here, folks. Article 3,
All right.
Section 2. Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution covers several topics.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's not simple.
Jury trials. All trials except impeachment cases must be by jury.
Right.
Trial location. Federal court jurisdiction. Federal courts have the power to hear cases involving the Constitution, federal laws, and federal treaties. They also have the power to hear disputes, et cetera, et cetera.
Haven't heard anything yet that curbs the court.
Supreme Court jurisdiction. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over certain cases, such as suits between states and cases involving
Yes,
ambassadors.
with that.
Hold on. One of our mods is messaging me. They say Congress can regulate SCOTUS appellate jurisdiction. They want to know if Congress can pick and choose which cases they can rule on.
Unsettled. The problem is
Thank
if
you,
Congress
Jeff.
passes such a law, which it can do, who interprets that law? Supreme Court, and they'll probably, this court anyway, shoot it down. That makes it very difficult to use that power to curb and regulate the Supreme Court. Speaking of courts, I just saw it like a couple of hours ago, an article, I think, from ProPublica.
Pro what?
I'm not sure. Tell me what it's called exactly.
ProPublica?
ProPublica,
You said
right.
ProPublica, like poo-poo.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, you got to give an old man a little, a little latitude for malapropism.
ProPublica. That's a first. I've never heard anybody call it
It turns
ProPublica.
out Judge Cannon, the one who's been so biased for Trump and so unqualified, turns out she's violated ethical standards by failing to report reimbursements for her attending a number of very recent conferences put on by right-wing organizations. Now, she's not on the Supreme Court. She's in the district court. Supreme Court has no ethics code. The district code does have an ethics code, and she could run into trouble with the circuit because of these ethical violations. Probably not. Courts are not very good at policing themselves, but they do have an ethical code, and this is a clear violation. They have to report all reimbursements within 30 days. Oh, and she claims it's an inadvertent, it's an error. That's what they always say when they violate the law. We didn't mean it. I didn't mean to shoot that guy. I happened to be there and I squeezed the trigger.
I'm still laughing at you.
I'm a judge. I interpret the Constitution, but I can't read a simple rule which says I have to disclose this within 30 days. Come on. That doesn't even begin to pass the smell test. By the way, Sam, you need to tell people about donations, your usual spiel. You haven't given it yet.
Do I have to do that every week, you think?
Every week, because we get different audience.
I'm still laughing at people who are making fun of you in the chat for calling it ProPublica.
Oh, God.
Can't get over that.
I don't mind
Poo.
being a target. Just wait till
Why
you're
would it be
7.
called? Why would it be called Publica?
I know.
Poo?
Well, they uncover a lot of poo, so yes.
Okay, I don't even know what you're saying now. All right. My spiel. My spiel is donations and memberships get priority in questions. We post a community tab post before the show where members can post their questions for the show. And then we glean super chat straight from the chat. If you want to follow us on social media, he's at Allan Lichtman on everything. I'm at Sammy Licht. Derek Taylor says, is your long-term economic key similar to Mr. Beats' real per capita growth. Can you please explain the long-term economic key in some
It's a little bit
detail?
different. He measures growth in the current year as compared to the previous years. He's kind of measuring an administration against itself. I look at growth throughout the administration and compare it to the average of the previous 2 years. So I think we're using the same metric, but using it in a different way. How many viewers do we have, Sam?
6,029.
Nice. And we
Uh,
won't get to every question, but we get to most of them today.
we're gonna try to get to most of them today. Yeah.
We've left more time.
Andrew Carlson says, Professor, I'm reading FDR and the Jews. Oh, I have an update too. I think people made fun of me because it was discovered that I hadn't read your books, right?
Right.
I
All
over the weekend I read FDR and the Jews as well.
right.
I
And you
finished it
liked it.
and I liked it. Yes. Andrew Carlson is reading it now as well. He says, "Why does it seem that more older Jews lean conservative despite many Republicans blocking aid to allies, anti-Semitic tropes, and refugee immigration during World War II?"
It's very hard to imagine, but there are a couple of reasons.
Well, a
One,
lot's changed since
people.
then.
What's that?
A lot has changed since then too.
Yes, of course. But older people generally lean more conservative than younger people, and that would cover people of every religious uh, denomination. Plus, more older Jews tend to be Orthodox, and the hard line in Israel, its base is in the Orthodox.
Right, and at least in America, the conservative movement has moved to be like so staunchly pro-Israel. So I think a lot of conservative Jews like that, right?
Yeah, that's been true for a while, but that's my point. The Orthodox is the base of the right wing in Israel, and Orthodox here can, to some extent, identify them. And let me tell you, 80% of Jews, approximately, it varies, but about 80% of Jews vote Democratic.
I have breaking news and a possible correction. Philip H donated $2, and they said it is pronounced publica in Latin.
Ha! Ha!
Wait, in Latin.
Ha! Ha!
All right, so I'm wrong.
After you mocked me.
Oh, now I look like an asshole. But nobody calls it ProPublica,
I'll
do
get
they?
your mom to reprimand you.
All right. I feel like I've never heard anybody call it ProPublica. Hold on, my dog is scratching at the door.
No one knows Latin as well as we do.
Come on in, Keith. Yeah, I know, right? Well, no, not me. I stand corrected.
All right, let's move on. We don't want to get hung up on this.
Okay, fine. Member Vernus Carby says, if Trump is assassinated or indisposed before the election, what steps would have to be taken by the Republican Party?
Look, I'm no expert on internal Republican Party rules, but my understanding is the Republican National Committee, which is now that the convention is dissolved, is in charge of rules. They would have to replace a deceased candidate with someone else.
We hope that doesn't happen.
Oh, absolutely. It's never happened, and we don't want it to ever happen.
I want to beat Trump at the ballot box. I want
Absolutely.
to. I want
And
the
you don't want Trump or anyone else to become a martyr.
right, exactly. And you just don't want violence. Period. Anyway, we already went through that.
I wrote a whole book on how to avoid violence. It's called
Right.
Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. There's no one that's been a stronger advocate of concrete ways of reducing violence in America.
Right. Garling Toad says, "Great show, loving the father-son vibe. Thank you." They say, as a historian, could you please share your thoughts on Gore Vidal and Robert Caro?
Well, Gore Vidal is a novelist, and I've read a number of his novels, Bonfire of the Vanities, among many others. He's also written historical novels. They're not exactly something that I would recommend to learn history from, but they're incredibly entertaining. And Robert Caro is a master of historical narrative. His series on LBJ stands as an incredible classic.
I just put a new poll in the chat. People a lot. I've noticed a lot lately that people are complaining about trolls in the chat. So I put up a poll asking if people want a subscriber only chat. So we'll see what happens there. Um,
I haven't detected any questions that looks like they're from trolls.
there's a whole don't there's a whole chat.
Don't, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't want to
you
hear it.
don't.
If it's
Yeah.
technical, it'll go over my head.
There's a whole chat that's going on right now
Oh, I
that's
got you.
totally separate from our gleaning of questions. Jesse Boone says, "Who are some people you'd consider for Harris's cabinet, including any possible Republicans that have been denouncing Trump?"
Well, you know, clearly there are Republicans you could pick. Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, if he's willing to return to public life, Mitt Romney, who's retiring from the Senate. So those are a few Republicans that I think Harris might consider.
Member Barry Smith says, "What are the Republicans' voter integrity demands to the funding bill, and what impact can they have on the 2024 election?"
As I understand, they want to establish a documentary citizenship requirement, something that's been shot down at the state level because of the federal ballot, which doesn't require that. They want to change that. It's a disaster because not everyone is going to be able to prove they're a citizen. You have to attest and take an oath that you're a citizen, but if you don't have a passport and you don't have access to your birth certificate, like a lot of older Black people in America, you're out of luck. And the truth is, this whole notion of voter fraud is a fraud. There isn't any consequential voter fraud in America. There's no consequential voting by non-citizens. It's already illegal. And here's why. You don't have this, you don't need voter ID, you don't need documentary requirement of citizenship. You'd have to be nuts to risk casting one extra vote. And if you get caught, and a lot of the people at the polling places know who you are, know their local people, or if you try to send in a mail ballot, they'll detect it. You're going to cast one illegal vote and risk 5 years in a federal penitentiary. It's nonsense. There's only one example in a federal election in the last 100 years of significant voter fraud. And you know what party committed it, Sam?
Republicans.
Exactly. In the congressional election in North Carolina, where they committed massive fraud on behalf of the Republican candidate. Was the first federal election since the 1920s to be decertified by a bipartisan state board of elections. And they were caught. So this whole notion of voter fraud is nothing more than a smokescreen to try to stop people from voting, particularly the minority base of the Democratic Party. And, this is clamping down on minority voting is as old as the Republic. Maybe the methods change, maybe the players change, but the battle rages on and it remains very, very much the same.
Junaid Naik says, "Could Tim Walz start a political change for the Democrats just like Ronald Reagan did with Republicans for the nation?"
Very difficult for a vice president to do that. You pretty much, as a vice president, are subordinate to the president, and your role is to support the president, and you don't tend to be nearly as visible as the president. Reagan, of course, was a two-term president, quite different than being vice president.
Flufakis says, "I noticed lately that the internet itself is not favorable towards Trump." I don't know about that. Would you say Donald Trump is one of the most hated people of our time?
He's both. He's one of
Right.
the most loved and most hated people of our time. Absolutely. He spurs very strong emotions on both sides. No one else in America today, who's prominent, spurs that kind of mass pro and con emotion. That's why I don't give him the charisma key, because he appeals to a narrow base. He's not someone who appeals across the board like Ronald Reagan did. Remember, Reagan won 49 states. Trump lost two elections. He lost the vote of the people by a combined 10 million votes.
Yeah, I guess when I was like, I don't know about that. It's like, yeah, it just depends on what corner of the internet you're on, I think, in terms of, there's plenty of corners on the internet where he gets tons of love. There's plenty of corners of the internet where he gets tons of hate. Um, Member David N says, in addition to voting, what is the best way individuals can influence the election?
Volunteer, knock on doors, distribute literature, be a poll watcher, probably the most important thing you can do, uh, steering people at the polls, make donations to candidates of your choice. So there's a lot you can do other than voting.
Member Chris
Staying
Wall.
awake there, Sam?
Nobody saw that except for you, and
Oh
now you
no,
told everybody I was
I've
yawning.
exposed you.
You exposed me for yawning. Member Chris Wall says, after applying your Senate keys, it looks like we will have a 50-50 Senate. This includes a tester win in Montana. Do you think Ted Cruz is a major national figure according to your keys? If not, and the Democrats raise more money, we could have a Democrat win in Texas for 51 seats. That's pretty
I
good.
haven't looked at these keys in decades, so I haven't made any determination.
Right, but that's pretty impressive that,
I'm delighted to see someone,
yeah.
you know, resurrecting them from the grave, and your analysis sounds pretty darn. But I haven't looked at them, as I said, I think since the 80s, maybe.
Did you see though that Liz Cheney endorsed what's his name in Texas?
Allred,
Yeah.
Ted Cruz, even Republicans admit, is the most hated man in Washington. The problem is he's in Texas. How many Democrats in the last decade have been elected statewide in Texas, federal or state?
In the last decade?
Last 2 decades, even.
Not
It's
many.
a trick question.
None.
Zero.
Yeah.
None. None to the Senate, governor, cabinet positions, Supreme Court, Court of Criminal Appeals, all of which are elected statewide, 100% Republican. It's the only
Um,
reason Ted Cruz survives.
right. Let's get to some of our Discord questions. If you want to join our Discord, the link to do so is in the description of this video. The link to our subreddit is also in the description of our video. Our first Discord question, Dad, is, are there
Whatever that is.
you say that every week.
I know. And you never need to explain it to me. Just
It's
ask the question.
it's not that complicated. It's just this app that creates sort of like an online chat community. So it's like a
I
constant
got it.
chat where you can create a community. Um,
Yeah.
Simplest way to put it. The first Discord question is: are there any other election models out there that you can think of that hold some real validity?
Boy, that's really hard to say. I used to think Professor Norporth's primary model did. He was the only other one who was right about 2016, but then he crashed and burned terribly in 2020, predicting an overwhelming landslide for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. So I would check out Alan Abramovich has a very good model. Obviously, doesn't have the track record of the keys, and it's not nearly as understandable of the keys, but he's a very good, very learned political scientist who's done a lot of good work. And there are a couple of journals you can look at. Uh, One is called Foresight, the International Journal of Applied Forecasting. Another is the International Journal of Forecasting. Also, every 4 years, there's a special issue of PS, Political Science, devoted to these other models.
Right. And Mr. Beat, what about Mr. Beat? We just heard his model last week.
Oh, right. Yeah. But he's not an academic, so he didn't spring to mind immediately. But I like his model. It's pretty clever.
Yeah. Geomes says, since the keys imply it doesn't matter how a candidate is chosen except avoiding a fight, should the parties abolish primaries to avoid future Trumps?
No, I don't think so. They used to avoid primaries. Primaries, until the early 20th century, there weren't any primaries at all. And selection exclusively by primaries and caucuses did not come in until after the McGovern Commission in 1968 mandated that for the Democrats, and the Republicans followed suit. So it's only as late as the 1970s. And there were huge party battles before that. In 1928, the Democratic Convention went over 100 ballots before it selected its nominee. Even Franklin Roosevelt was not selected on the first ballot. It took a few ballots before Franklin Roosevelt was nominated. Lots of candidates only got nominated after huge party battles.
Do you want to do a poll? Do you want to see if people think Cruz is going to win or not? I'm kind of interested to see what people think.
Sure.
You think no shot, right? That he's going to lose.
I don't think
Let's
he's
do a
going to win,
poll.
but I don't know if I'm not, this is just my gut
Do you
from
think
knowing how
Cruz
Republican
will
Texas
win?
politics has been.
Right.
And he
Yes.
had a very good opponent last time, Beto O'Rourke, and still won. I don't think he's going to win big, but maybe a couple of points.
Let's see
It
what.
doesn't matter.
Let's see. Our next question comes from the wonderful Marcus Carana. They say, "What are the odds of a 2000 election event happening again, where you predicted it right but Democrats still lose? I'm scared 2000 will happen in 2024."
I don't predict that. I always stick to the keys, but your trepidations are legitimate. I've talked about this at a previous show that we devoted to it. A lot of election deniers are now either in state boards of elections, like in North Carolina, or in local county boards. And there, I do believe, would not hesitate to manipulate the vote or cancel the vote in order to help Trump. And then it goes to the courts, good in 2020, but no guarantee they'll be even-handed this time. So I don't think it's going to happen, but it's not an illegitimate worry.
Tanner
And
John.
that's why I've said many times, become a poll watcher, go to the polls, make sure there aren't any shenanigans. If you're a lawyer, join the team of lawyers to make sure that any litigation goes the right way, that the election is fair and secure and not stolen by election deniers.
Um, Tanner Johnson wants to know what are your thoughts on Richard Dawkins? Do you know who that is?
Yeah, kind of. I haven't really thought about him and can't comment right now. I
Richard,
think I've read some stuff of his, but not recently.
he's a
Some
British
kind of
evolutionary
physicist or something.
biologist.
Yeah, but oh, he's one of those, I think, uh, bi biologists who, tries to figure out biological determinism, how biology shapes our destiny,
Right,
which is not a theory I necessarily subscribe to, but I'm not a scientist of that kind.
right. Diego Yanez Holtz says, "I know you don't answer hypotheticals, but will Republicans, after Trump loses, will they be more moderate or will they continue with MAGA or continue with Trumpism?"
Yeah, as you know, I don't like hypotheticals, but I will say this without making a definitive prediction. MAGA is the Republican Party. This idea of mainstream Republicans, they don't barely exist anymore. That's why, someone like Mitt Romney, the 2012 Republican nominee, Mr. Republican, about as classic a Republican as you can get, is completely isolated from the mainstream of his own party. So it would take a lot to change the complexion of the Republican Party. It's solidly MAGA.
Member Tony Quintanilla says, "Can you explain polling statistics more? Is Silver using the Monte Carlo simulation method? Why is it not scientific?"
I have no idea what methodology Nate Silver uses, but I do know there's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. I don't care what method he uses, as long as it's fundamentally based on the polls, it is going to be fundamentally misleading. It may be right from time to time, but the problem is you never know whether it's right or wrong. And it's constantly flipping like a lanternfly. Just a week ago, he said Trump had almost a two-thirds chance of winning. Now he's down somewhere in the mid 50 range in just a week. Where's it going to flit to next? How can you put any confidence in anything Nate Silver says when you know, by the time you consider it, it's going to change again?
Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi says, are you familiar with Mark Elias and his work with the organization Democracy Docket? Have you worked with them at all? If so, in what way? Mark is a frequent on Brian Tyler Cohen, who is another YouTuber.
I'm very familiar with Mark Elias. He is kind of the leading lawyer for the Democrats when it comes to preserving fair elections, to combating things like gerrymandering, racial and political restrictions on registration and voting. He is probably the foremost legal advocate of opportunities to vote. I haven't worked for Democracy Docket, but I have been involved with lawyers associated with Mark Elias in lawsuits challenging restrictive voter laws.
Chrissy G donated $10 to say, please give your dad a break. I feel for him because my kids remind me of my age all the time, especially when I say, what on earth? Laugh out loud. Love you both.
Hey, I don't mind. If the worst I have to deal with is Sam's mild reprimands, I can certainly live with that.
Right.
Believe me, I get worse things every single day. I can't tell you how often I'm attacked. And 99.9% of the attacks are stupid and insulting and have nothing to do with the way the keys really are.
Reynaldo Estrada says, can you show your model for Senate races?
I don't even have it anymore, to be honest with you. I abandoned it decades ago and don't want to resurrect it. Could be into a lot of trouble.
How would you describe any differences in how a president governs in a first and second term? In a second term, it seems to me that having no pressure to get reelected makes presidents feel like they can make bold choices than in their first term, even though most of them fail to obtain the policy key.
Yeah, it's very interesting. There's something called the second term curse. That is almost across the board. First terms are more successful than second terms. You know, look what happened to Ronald Reagan in his second term. Virtually nothing in domestic policy after the extraordinary Reagan revolution of his first term. Uh, Barack Obama never followed up in his second term with anything comparable to the Affordable Care Act. It's not always the case, but I think one reason for that is you tend to have your best ideas early. You're not saving them, hoping you'll get reelected and put them out 5 years later. You want to get them right out immediately. And, there's a certain freshness, a certain appeal to a newly elected president. Reagan, for example, in his Reagan Revolution on Economics, was able to bring over and had to bring over a lot of Democrats to vote for his initiatives.
Our second Discord question of the day, they want to know, can you make a diss track against Nate Silver?
A what?
You know what a diss track is? Like in rap, like rappers make diss tracks against each other.
I'm sure I could, but I don't want to give the guy any more oxygen.
I'll do one real.
But by the way, I'm like, I would say, world-class bad singer.
But you don't have to sing to rap.
Oh, that I'm pretty good if I don't
Here,
have to sing.
I'll give you a line. Ready? Nate Silver, you are a clerk. What rhymes with clerk? Nate Silver.
But we don't want to
No,
that.
no. Nate Silver, clerk. Nate Silver, you are a clerk. Why don't you get back to work?
Hey, no, Nate Silva, you are a clerk. Why don't you get a new job of work?
Oh!
Much better.
Oh! That was really good, Dad.
Yeah,
Ryan Grill says, hi. Why is FDR your favorite president?
because several things. He's the greatest domestic policy innovator. So much of policy today we owe to FDR's New Deal. Secondly, he's the greatest party builder. He got elected at a time when Republicans pretty much owned everything and transformed that, developed the Roosevelt coalition, and thirdly, led us through the worst war in the history of the world. It's a pretty good record.
Um, FJ Marcliffe with a $50 donation. Thank you so much. They say, Professor, why do you think the two assassination attempts were from registered Republicans? Is that true? Is the second one guy?
I have no idea if that's true. And I'm not attributing anything to that. I
I
don't want to get into conspiracy theories about the assassination attempt.
I think both of these men were violent individuals, and that's why they did what they did. I don't think it had
Yeah,
anything to do with
as
what they were
I
registered
said, we
as.
don't know the motives of it throughout history of any of these attempted assassins or successful assassins,
Right. I believe they were doing it for violence sake, essentially. Um,
or maybe just to become famous or infamous.
maybe.
We'll never know. We
Yeah.
can speculate forever.
Um, Blue says, "What are your thoughts on Israel's attack on Hezbollah? Did you hear about that? Like
I
they
did
blew
hear
up all
about
the
that on the
pagers?
exploding pages. I thought it was reprehensible.
Yeah, what
You
the
know,
heck? That's so
Netanyahu is
weird.
making himself into a war criminal. He's making Israel into a pariah. That's an indiscriminate kind of attack that could kill anyone or hurt anyone. I've heard that a child was either hurt or killed. I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me. Shame on you, Netanyahu.
I didn't even know you could do that. You could blow up people's pagers. That's pretty crazy.
It's crazy. And, now Hezbollah pretty much can do whatever it wants, and Israel no longer has the moral high ground. This is the tragedy of Netanyahu. He's not going to eliminate Hamas, whatever he does. It's not going to work. But at the same time, he has made Israel a worldwide pariah. And Israel, this little tiny nation surrounded by vastly larger enemies, cannot afford to become an international pariah. And single handedly, with his right wing allies, that's exactly what Netanyahu is doing. I cry over that as a strong supporter of Israel. And Trump thinks if you don't support Netanyahu, means you don't support Israel. What abject nonsense. I think if you're a supporter of Israel, you should be desperately hoping for an alternative to Netanyahu, who is perhaps as great a danger to Israel as you can imagine within the country.
Wait, you're saying Trump said something nonsensical?
Oh, excuse me, I didn't really mean that.
That's shocking to me.
And Trump tells us, who's a good Jew and who's a bad Jew. You're a
Right.
bad Jew if, you don't support him. Thank you so much, Rabbi Donald J. Trump, the well-known Talmudic scholar who didn't even know how to hold the Bible right side up.
Donald Trump, the Talmudic scholar.
Yes.
Maybe
Talk about an oxymoron, right?
maybe in an alternate universe.
Yes.
Alex Kawa says, how much attention are you paying to the ballot measures across the country? Personally, those are my favorite parts of the election because not only do they show where the voters stand on the issues, but they have the most direct impact on public policy.
Very smart comment. I'm not sure I say it's the most important, but it doesn't get nearly enough attention. And, I think that 10 ballot measures, including in my home state of Maryland, on abortion rights. And as you know, in Maryland, Sam's phenomenal mom, my wife, Karen Strickler, when she was head of the Maryland affiliate of the National Abortion Rights, actually codified Roe versus Wade, a political miracle in the statute books of Maryland. Now there is a ballot question, question one in Maryland, to put the protections for women's reproductive rights in the Constitution itself, not just in the statute books. And every time a reproductive freedom amendment is on the ballot, even in deep red states like Kansas and Ohio, it's not only won, but it's won very handily. So, the audience member is right. These ballot measures are of extreme importance. And by the way, you heard Donald Trump screaming, I'm so proud of overturning Roe versus Wade. Everybody believes it should go back to the states and be subject to the democratic vote of the people. Of course, nearly two-thirds of Americans are against the overturning of Roe versus Wade, the first time in history the Supreme Court took away a constitutional right. And Trump supporters in all of these states are fighting tooth and nail to keep these reproductive freedom referenda off the ballot and not letting people have their vote.
Um, Sean asks, I know you have no prediction system for this, but do you think North Carolina or Florida is more likely to go for Harris in November? Also, have you ever been to the Oval Office? If so, how did it feel?
I think North Carolina, just based on history, it's been closer in last couple of elections than Florida. I've been to the White House several times. I don't think I've ever been to the Oval Office, though. Maybe if Harris gets elected, she'll invite me. I doubt if Trump would, but I thought he might after he sent me that congratulatory note in 2016.
Um, Asturiao says, what are the chances of Texas turning blue this year?
I've talked about that a lot. For
Right.
the last 20 years, people are saying to me, Texas is going to turn blue when Hispanics start voting in large numbers. It's not blue, but at least turn purple. Hasn't happened. Texas is still solidly red, as we said. Not a single Democrat in at least 10 years, maybe 20, has been elected statewide in Texas. So I'll see the change when I see the change, I'll believe it, but I'm not predicting it anymore.
Aaron Cooper says, with the 13 keys, how were you able to predict the election of 1984 years in advance versus recent elections that are a few months in advance?
Great question. That's the beauty of the keys because they tap into the structure of how elections really work. Sometimes they fall into place early, like in 1982, but even a recent election did. I predicted the reelection of Barack Obama in 2010. And I'm sure I told you my story about how I immediately got attacked in a 30-page attack piece by Nate Silver. But I'm not going to. Should I tell that story again, Sam?
No, we've told it.
No, I told it, and of course, ultimately, I was right. And in particular, when there is an incumbent running for reelection, because you sort of off the top win two keys, incumbency and contest, often the keys do fall into place early. But in recent years, we were a more complex society. We're more involved in more countries. Uh, Political polarization is increased. The keys have fallen into place late, but there's no timetable.
James says, what do you think will happen if there is a terrorist attack at polling locations on election day? Well, let's just hope that doesn't happen.
If there's a what attack?
It's a terrorist attack.
That does not happen. I don't even want to think about that. And again, I'm not a law enforcement professional. But let me say this, given all the threat to poll workers, have you heard about the white powder, Sam?
The white powder? No.
White powder. Election officials in about half a dozen states got white powder sent to them by some organization called End Assassination to I forget exactly, but something like getting rid of traitors, the Traitor Elimination Association, very much a typical MAGA kind of name. And they've been threatening election workers throughout and maligning election workers. I mean, Rudy Giuliani's on the hook for over $100 million for ruining the lives of two election workers by claiming, falsely that they were committing election fraud and even passing around supposed, sticks of ballots like they were vials of dope, and these are two African Americans, just think how horrific that is. At any rate, about half a dozen states had election officials mailed white powder, which looks like anthrax, a deadly powder. It turns out it was not harmful, but it's a terroristic act. It not hurt anyone yet, but certainly to send something that people could think is going to kill them is a terrorist attack on them. And these election workers, they're ordinary folks. They're you and me. They're your neighbors. They're people who go out of their way to make democracy work. And believe me, they are way underpaid for what they do. And they should not be getting all this abuse. It's abysmal.
All right, 6 more questions, Dad, and then we will have answered all the questions on my Google Doc. You ready?
Wow, I'm ready.
Oh, this is not even a question. Jacob Travail just says that he had his own rap for Nate Silver. He says, "Yo, Nate, you can't win the battle. To Alan Lichtman, you hold no candle." Doesn't really rhyme, but hey, thank you, Jacob.
But I like the sentiment.
Smoke Dog says, "Hi, I'm curious your thoughts on historian Peter Turchin's prediction about America having a civil war in the 2020s and his overall analysis of war."
I will say one word, bunk.
Bonk.
Trump couldn't even get his supporters beyond a number you can count on 2 hands to come out and support him when he was on trial in New York. There were more cops than pro-Trump demonstrators. There is no way he is going to get mass support for any kind of civil war. But what is frightening is, the violent rhetoric could inspire, if he loses, individuals to engage in act of violence, but certainly not a civil war. That analysis is bunk.
Krasimir Boyanov says, professor, not president. You're a professor. You're not the president. Did you know that?
Oh, rats.
Damn. They say, Professor, who is the best U.S. bipartisan president?
Wow. Have been many. One that comes to mind, and it's not going to be one you think I'm going to tell you, Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower did work across the aisles for things like the Federal Highway Act, something we forget about, but is in fact one of the most significant initiatives by any president. And it was very much bipartisan, as was his setting up of NASA and the beginning of the American space program.
A bit of an odd question from Windows 95.
Before we get to the next question, check in on our poll.
Oh, right. I forgot about our poll. Wow, we're almost at 2,000 votes in our poll. Do you think Ted Cruz? Do you think Ted? Yeah, it is his name. Do you think Cruz will win? 38% say yes, he will win. 62% say no, he will lose.
Wow. Even I don't think that, but that's pretty amazing.
Interesting. Back to our strange question. I'm not really sure. Well, okay, I'll just read it. How will Trump's affair with Laura Loomer affect his scandal key? Well, one, I don't think there's any confirmation that he's having an affair with her, and 2, there is no Trump scandal key.
Right, the scandal key only applies to the sitting president, doesn't apply to the challenging candidate. If that was the case, there are multiple reasons to turn the scandal key against Trump. Not insignificantly 34 felony convictions.
Sean, our mod, says that he thinks the results of our poll are wishful thinking, 63%.
There may be something to that, of course.
I
wouldn't discount that.
Yeah. Last 2 questions, and then you can join me for the Lichtman Live post show on my channel. The link to that is in the description of this video.
I notice on your show, you've been getting, when you post it on YouTube, several thousand views. So you're getting some attention there.
Me?
You?
Yeah. My lives in the end get 1,000 views, maybe something like that.
No, but when you post them, you get more than that.
No, when I'm live, there's only 100 people. But yeah, when they.
Oh, I see what you're saying. But I've seen more than 1,000 views on your stuff.
Maybe so. Thank you, Dad.
Yeah, I've been monitoring.
Oh, you're a monitor.
I think I knew how to find these things, but I do.
I didn't think you knew. Yeah. Last 2 questions of Lichtman Live before Lichtman Live post show on my channel. Fit Girl 1963 says, Professor, what do you think of pollster Frank Luntz or Lunt? Is it Luntz?
Luntz,
Yeah.
Luntz. He's become more of a focus group guy. And, as you know, I don't give any truck to pollsters, but Luntz seems, he's a Republican, but he seems like a pretty even-handed guy. And I give no credence to focus groups. What 12 people tell you doesn't mean a thing, but at least it's interesting and entertaining. And, he seems to be one of the better ones.
Our last question of the night is quite a doozy. What are your thoughts on Henry Kissinger? And is he as controversial as people say he is?
He is absolutely controversial. On the one hand, he gets a lot of credit for the initiatives, the positive initiatives of the Nixon administration, the treaties with the Soviet Union, the opening up of China. But on the other hand, there's a lot of blood in his hands, not the least of which for the bloody coup in Chile that overturned a democratically elected government and installed a horrible, uh, murderous dictator. So, yes, there's a reason he's controversial.
Right. Good point, Dad. All right. With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live here, Dad. What's your final words to the people tonight?
Yes. Violence and violent rhetoric have no place in this country. I understand people are passionate and people have divisions, but we don't need to resort to violent rhetoric or, heaven forbid, actual violence to resolve our differences.
That was a good final ending. Here's a final ending that you'll like. Pyramid Eye wrote in the chat. They say, this probably won't be read. While I'm reading it, Pyramid Eye, they say, but just want to say Alan Lichtman looks so young for his age. I really thought he was 50. I love this man. There you go, Dad.
Best comment I've heard in months.
And with that, we'll say good night.
And the hair is real.